Today, we're talking about the best TVs you can buy in 2024 and how the annual Value Electronics Shootout crowned new kings of TV in 2024. And yes, I did say kings as there were two winners this year because the shootout was divided into OLED and mini LED categories. But before we dive into all the details, I'd like to welcome our editor at large, Chris Boylan, who was at this year's shootout to see how it all went down. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Brian, how's it going? Happy to be here. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. Been going to the Value Electronics Shootout for a while now, and it's always an interesting event. A lot of fun to see all the top performing TVs shooting it out, as it were, in a dark room. Sometimes they open the drapes a little bit, so it's not
Right.
entirely dark. But yeah, it's a fun event, and happy to be here recapping it.
And I understand they've been holding this for 20 years now. Has it always been in the same place?
No, in the early days, and I think it started in 2004. They did host it at the Value Electronics showroom, version one. It's actually not the one that would be pictured to those of us who are those of you in the audience who are watching the video version of this. Um, it was a little bit smaller and it got really hot. There was a lot of bodies in there, and they didn't want to run the AC too loud, so we were all sweating by the end of the day. Um, but over time, it got a little more popular. It got Dealer Scope involved, and they were having sponsors, help to fund it. So they moved to some swanky locations in Manhattan. But Dealer Scope is pretty much gone now, and they are not associated with the event anymore. So Robert brought it back home to the new and improved Value Electronics showroom in Scarsdale, New York, and yeah, it was great. They had plenty of room. They fed us some good food, some sushi, and
Right.
Mexican food and pastries to keep us, our blood sugar levels up so we didn't fall asleep in the middle of the darkened room.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been around 20 years, and I've been covering it for 13. I first started going in 2011, so I've seen a lot of changes over time, but it's always had the same goals in mind: find the highest performance TV and let people know about it.
Right. So which TVs competed this year?
Okay, so for the first time, they actually broke it into two different categories: one for mini LEDs, as you said, and one for OLEDs. Um, it wasn't a big surprise that the OLEDs actually perform better overall than the mini LEDs, just because they have some inherent picture quality advantages. But what they had was three of each: an LG, Sony, and Samsung mini LED TV, and LG, Sony, and Samsung OLED TV. Of course, the LG was the WRGB OLED, and the Sony and Samsung were QD OLED, so OLED with a quantum dot color label, color layer. I'm sorry, to provide the colors.
Right.
So the OLEDs were the G4, the A95L from Sony, the G4 was from LG, and the Samsung was the S95D, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure that's the model number. On the mini LED side, it was the Bravia 9, which is also known as the XR90, I think, on the Sony side, Samsung QN90D, and the LG QNED90T. So it's pretty much the top of the line picture, top of the line TV from each
Right.
vendor in each category.
Right. So, I mean, I think people will right off the bat go, okay, you have three brands, but there are more than three brands that sell OLED TVs and mini LED TVs. So why weren't they part of the shootout?
So at the time of the event, there were no other TV makers selling OLED TVs in the US. Panasonic came back into the market just a couple of weeks ago. Um, but yeah, there are definitely other companies that make LCD TVs, and two of the notable, strong sellers that are up there in the top five TV vendors are TCL and Hisense. So Robert is a dealer and a businessman. He actually does carry all five brands, and he gave both TCL and Hisense the opportunity to participate. And when they said they didn't want to participate, he respected that decision because, as he said in the past, sometimes he's brought in some brands that have put in kind of an embarrassing performance, and that doesn't really help. So he left it up to TCL and Hisense to see if they wanted to participate, and both vendors chose not to. So that's how we ended up with just LG, Sony, and Samsung, which are really, the top performers right now. They are.
Right. Well, I think everyone wants to know how this is a fair fight, because there's a lot of things that can be challenging when setting up a TV. Obviously, you can just turn it on, but how did they
Yeah.
how did they make sure that it was as fair as possible?
Well, they calibrated every TV. Dwayne D. Nice Davis and Cecil Mead were the calibrators, who actually calibrated all 6 of the TVs on day one. And as you can see, there's actually a reference monitor in there from Sony. It's a $43,000 31-inch TV that they use professionally to master films, basically, and color them and compress them and everything. So the goal was to try to look to see which of these TVs in their highest performance, fully calibrated settings came closest to the reference TV. And that's basically what the judges were tasked with, was evaluating each TV compared to that reference.
What other aspects did the judges consider in setting this up?
None. So TVs, when you buy a TV, you don't just look at picture quality, although of course picture quality is the most important thing, right? But each of these is based on a different operating system and streaming platform. Sony's got Google TV, LG's got WebOS, Samsung's got Tizen. They're all in a pretty level playing field when it comes to the streaming apps that you can find in each of those platforms. But there are some differences into the way the TVs operate. There's some features like that DTS:X feature in IMAX Enhanced they can only get on the Sony Google TV. That might be important to people when they buy a TV, to be able to get that kind of a feature, to have a really cinematic, sound experience when watching IMAX Enhanced content. So, the remote controls are important. How do they fit in your hand, and do they operate well? How fast is the user interface? None of those things were considered as part of the judges' scoring criteria. It was just picture quality and picture quality alone.
And you did mention that Sony reference monitor as the benchmark. Does that give Sony an advantage because the Sony reference monitor can be used for, well, I guess any company can use that monitor for building a TV, but if the company that builds the TV and the calibration monitor are the same, maybe there's something there. How do you see it?
Some people have tried to make that point, and I understand it, but accurate is accurate, right? You have a $43,000 dual cell LCD TV, 4,000 nits of peak brightness. It's the one that's being used in the studios when a director comes and says, "This movie in the theaters, I want it to look this way at home." The BVM, the Sony BVM, is how they make that comparison. So, to say that Sony has an advantage, well, maybe, because they probably share some of the same engineers in developing that TV, so they can make their TVs look more accurate. But then would you also say, do LCD TVs automatically get an advantage because the broadcast monitor is, after all, an LCD TV? But they don't. And in fact, even the highest performing of the mini LED TVs didn't really approach the picture quality of the OLEDs in most viewing conditions.
Right. So let's go over a little bit of the results. I think a lot of people want to know who won, how they won, what it all means. And for the second year in a row, the Sony A95L won, the same model. It's a 2023 model, and it won last year's competition, and it won this year's shootout. So speak to us about
about the Sony.
about the Sony.
Some people have complained about the Sony even being in the running because it was introduced in 2023, but it was introduced late in 2023, and it is still current in the Sony lineup. So this is Sony's best OLED TV. It's QD OLED. Panel is made by Samsung, processing by Sony. It's a killer TV. It was last year. It was again this year. You know what? If they don't replace it in the line and they keep selling it next year, it could come back again. It doesn't really matter when the TV was invented or first released. It matters what the performance is. And as long as they're keeping up on the user interface and the processing and everything can compete with the current models at that time, I think it's absolutely fine. The other thing people ask about is how are the judges judging the TV? What kind of content is being used? And that, it's a combination of test patterns and movie clips played back on a Kaleidoscape, but also on a Magnetar disc player, because Kaleidoscape can't really do slow motion or a fixed freeze frame. And sometimes the tests, they want to have just one still image to really highlight specular highlights or shadow detail, for example. So the content that they use is specifically designed to bring out the best and worst of TVs, right? It's motion resolution, it's upscaling, it's HDR, it's 4,000 nits content mastered for 4,000 nits. So I think, the judges were pretty, given pretty clear instructions. Compare the TVs to the reference, which one comes closest. Sometimes in some content, the TVs actually looked better than the reference because of some of the processing they were doing. But you have to really match it up against the $43,000 reference and say which one's coming closest. And being there, I think the judges reached the right decision. I mean, I think that the Sony TV, again, on most content and in most categories, looked just a little bit better. Not a lot better. I mean, the scores between the Samsung and the Sony in particular, 1/10 of a point, and the LG is only like half a point behind. So it was very close. The OLEDs, I think, did look better overall, but I think the judges got it right, personally.
Well, you said something interesting that looked better than reference. How could it look better than reference? If reference is reference, how do you get better than better?
Well, better is a quality.
Subjective.
Yeah, it's a subjective statement. Sometimes the reference may have had its colors look a little bit more muted, but that may have been a more accurate representation of what the director wanted. And some of the TVs, the color may have been a little more vivid or a little more saturated, or tending in a particular direction that our eyes find pleasing, even if not necessarily accurate. So, detail could look better on one of the other TVs just due to its detail processing. But they were supposed to try to keep it as a comparison to reference, and whichever one came closest was the one that would get the highest score in each of the categories.
And to be clear, you were not a judge, but you were there watching as everything went down.
Correct. He asked me to be a judge. I usually opt not to be a judge. I like to be able to pay attention to recording the event, and in my own thoughts and pictures and everything else. In previous years, I've filled in if like one of the judges couldn't make it back for day 2. But for the most part, I prefer not to be one of the judges and let these people who are colorists and calibrators and video producers and compressionists make the judgments. And actually, Nilay Patel from The Verge, fellow journalist and TV reviewer or technology reporter, was there and covered this as well. So the people that they pick as judges, I would say, are generally very well informed about TV technology and have a pretty good background of seeing the content on different types of TVs to be able to identify which really looks the best.
And you think, I know people always like to second guess these things, but people could see the models. They know they knew the brands they were looking at. There was no secret masking that was involved in hiding that. So there's always that brand bias that could be part of the results.
It could. And I in past years, I've gone in like really thinking, well, that Panasonic Plasma is going to win because I own one, right? But I think these people are professionals. Many of them have come back multiple years. David McKenzie, the compressionist who Fidelity Motion, I think is his company. He actually masters movies for home use. He has got a great eye, and I think he definitely maintains objectivity. I don't even know which one he has at home. I know Nilay Patel had bought a Sony recently, but again, if you're in an event like this and you're seeing them all side by side, like against the reference, I think they'd be objective enough to say, yeah, this one really did look better. And plus, it's really impossible to hide because each TV's got a different operating system, different user menus, and the characteristics of a QD OLED versus an OLED are different in very specific ways. So I think even if they had put masking tape over the brand name, it wouldn't have really solved the problem. So it's not double blind or anything like that, but I think it's still an accurate way of judging the TVs.
And the TVs were judged across 6 different categories. For
Yep.
those listening on the podcast, that's SDR reference,
Hmm.
SDR bright room, HDR general, HDR dark scenes, HDR bright scenes,
Hmm.
streaming, and then all that was averaged into an overall score. The Sony A95L came out on top with an
Hmm.
8.9 score.
Right.
Samsung S95D 8.8, so
Right.
zero point 0.1
Hmm.
behind.
Hmm.
And the Samsung did win 2 of the 6 categories, and Sony won
Yep.
4.
Yep.
And then the LG G4 was the third place with an overall score of 8.4. And this is so the difference was half a point between first place and second and third place.
Yep.
Um, and you saw them all. I mean, how do you? Because I don't. I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't think any of those TVs is bad.
No, I think all of
Nobody
those
would be
TVs.
unhappy
Yeah,
with
yeah.
any
All
of them.
those TVs look great, and as I mentioned before, even the LG was a few points higher than the highest of the mini LED TVs, which we're going to cover next. But the content was really specifically created to highlight these particular elements of picture quality. Right? They used the Spears
Right.
and Munsell UHD reference disc set, which is awesome for things like skin tone, bright room performance, picture uniformity. It's a combination, test patterns, and movie clips. So not just theoretical stuff on the test pattern, but real world clips that can highlight things like shadow detail and specular highlights. And they had everything going through an AV Pro switch to deliver the exact identical signal to all 6 TVs. That turned into a little bit of a challenge, which I'll probably mention a little later in the podcast. But they were really trying to do their best to maintain a level playing field, same player, same switch, same
Right.
cables between everything, to give every TV like an equal footing at the beginning.
And then you have the issue of lights on, lights off, and any
Hmm.
glare that can happen. So talk to
Yeah,
us
and
about that.
yeah, yeah. So most high-end TVs have a mirror-like screen that reflects any room lighting, um, and that can be annoying if you have lights on in the room where you're watching it, like a living room, for example. The one exception is the Samsung QD OLED, which has like an anti-reflective screen, which actually diffuses room light instead of reflecting it back. So that has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is when you're looking at a TV, this TV, the QD OLED from Samsung, you won't see the reflection of a light. You won't see like a big honking light bulb in the middle of your TV. What it does is instead is it kind of scatters or diffuses the light across the screen. But the net effect of that is that it raises the black level to a point where it looks kind of almost like an LED LCD TV instead of looking like an OLED. Fix the problem, turn off the light, and then it looks just like any other OLED. I guess the goal was that people are less annoyed by a diffuse light background. It's less likely to take you out of the experience of that movie or the sports show you're watching, um,
Right.
and more annoyed by a clear reflection of a light bulb or a lamp or a computer screen in the glass. So, yeah, Samsung chose one approach. The others chose a different approach. Depending on the environment, one might be better than the other. Um, it's really a judgment call. I would recommend that people who are shopping for these don't just look at the score, the number, and buy it. I mean, if you want to, you're going to get a good TV. But if you get a chance to go to a local showroom, see what the actual TV looks like in a bright room, it might help you to make your mind up.
Right. Well, and there are other differences that were not part of the test, like the operating
Mhm.
system.
Mhm.
If you've had a previous model, you might like that operating system from that brand. The
Absolutely true.
remotes are different.
Mhm.
Most of the streaming capabilities are the same, but like you
Mhm.
said, some of the audio features are different.
Mhm.
So there are other reasons to buy any of these TVs, other than just ultimate picture quality torture test, which is
Yep.
essentially what they did, right? If you
Yep.
did a torture test on these TVs, can they pass the
Mhm.
hardest scenes,
Right.
the most difficult content? But we're talking about like probably 0.1% of all content you may watch. And that was what the test was based on.
Yeah,
Not,
but
yeah,
yes, but I think what they're trying to prevent, right, is that someone will buy a TV, get it home, it looks great, and then all of a sudden it looks terrible because the credits just came on and the white text is scrolling on the black background.
yeah,
And I think by watching or reading about an event like this, watching an event like this, people are prepared for that. They're going to know what content looks best and what content doesn't look as good, what viewing environments are good, what viewing environments are bad. So when they buy the TV, there are no surprises when they get it home. If someone doesn't watch credits, I personally actually watch the credits. I don't know. I like the music. I like, giving some respect to the
right.
10,000 people that helped make a movie. I can't watch credits on a non-OLED TV.
Bothers me.
Even on the best mini LED, there's some haloing, there's some blooming. Sometimes there's motion artifacts as it's scrolling up the screen, depending on the settings. I mean, you can get that on any TV, but every time I'm watching Blade Runner and the titles come up, and I'm not watching an OLED TV, I'm reminded of the fact that I'm not watching an OLED TV. And that bothers me. I'm sorry. I can't see past it. I don't watch TV a lot in bright rooms. So for me, OLED is king. I know that's not the right decision for everybody, but it is for me.
Right. Well, let's do talk about the mini LED sets for the
Mhm.
second part of the shootout. So they had their
Yep.
separate calibration.
Well, they were
S-
calibrated the same way as
right.
the OLEDs were, to the same color standards and brightness settings and contrast settings. So there was no
So
different,
yeah.
yeah, no difference there really.
And then once again, we have the same three brands: Sony,
Mhm.
Samsung, LG, um, and they go head to head
Mhm.
against the same Sony reference monitor that they used
Yep.
in the
Yep.
OLED shootout,
Mhm.
and giving the results on the screen, and I'll kind of just run over them. So
Mhm.
the Sony Bravia 9 was the winner. So Sony won both categories, the mini
Yep.
LED and the
Mhm.
and then Samsung QN-S95D was again point 0.1 behind
There's no
for
S
second.
though. It's just QN95D.
Oh, QN-95D. Sorry. Yeah,
Yep.
these model numbers are
I know
driving
they're
me
super
crazy.
confusing.
I,
I agree. I
please name
agree.
them better. So
No, thank you, Sony.
thank you,
Bravia 9.
Sony, for Bravia
Bravia 9.
9.
Yeah.
Um, Even though if you're looking at it on the video version, there is a
Yep.
long
It still
model
has a model
number
number. Yep, it's true. Yep. Mhm.
K65XR90.
Mhm.
Um, and then on the mini LED, LG was in third place again
Mhm.
with the QNED90T.
Mhm.
And I guess what's interesting is just like the OLED category, Sony won 4 of the 6 categories, and
Mhm.
Samsung won 2.
Right.
So uh, a
Well,
lot
there's
of
consistency,
similarities.
really. Yeah.
What?
Yep. There's consistency in the picture design
Right,
between the two different technologies, and that reflects in the scores.
right. And I will go over the 2 categories that Samsung won:
Mhm.
SDR Bright Room and
Yeah.
HDR Bright Scenes.
Mhm.
And I think those might have been the same. No, they weren't exactly the same as
Mhm.
the OLED category, where they won SDR Bright Room and
HDR
HDR
dark.
Dark
Yeah.
Scenes. So,
Yep.
um, so, but yeah, let me hear your thoughts on the mini LED shootout.
So when I originally got the release, I thought they were separating it into two competitions, like one in the morning, one in the afternoon. But that's not what they did. They were all on at the same time. They were all being judged at the same time. It's just the OLEDs were on one side and the mini LEDs were on the other. Um, and I think some of the judges probably felt the same way. When you'd walk over to where the mini LEDs were and you'd start taking your notes on the right hand side, you'd write them down and okay, this is yeah, blah blah, and then you'd move over to the left and you're like, the OLEDs. I mean, you did, but they did encourage everyone to walk right in front of the TV, step back a little bit to make sure you're actually 100% on axis, looking straight at the TV. Because one of the other drawbacks of a LCD TV, even these mini LEDs, is as you get a little bit off axis, a little bit off to the left or to the right, the colors start to fade, and you're not looking at what the TV is actually doing. And that's just life. That's the way things are with LED LCD TVs. With the OLED, you can actually be about 45 degrees off axis, and you haven't really lost much of the brightness or the color accuracy. So I guess between or among the three mini LEDs, it was pretty clear early on that the LG model wasn't really keeping up with the others and some of the picture quality factors, but it's a $1,900 TV versus like a $3,500 TV or something. It's significantly cheaper. So, could I live with one? Of course, it had a really nice picture for the money, but knowing what else is out there and seeing it up against the other ones, I'd much prefer to have one of LG's OLEDs instead, even one of their entry level
Right.
OLEDs, like a B4 or a C4. I think they definitely outperform the mini LEDs, in my opinion.
So on the mini LED test, Sony had the advantage of a model that was basically double the price of the LG.
Pretty close, I
Pretty
think. Yeah,
close
I
to
don't have
it.
the retail prices in front of me, but yeah. And Sony doesn't bargain much on their pricing. I mean, you can
Right.
get a little bit of a discount on sale days, but pretty much the retail price is pretty close to what you're going to pay for it.
Right.
Some of the other vendors, actually vendors that were not included in the show, have prices that are kind of all over the map. But the pricing of the three top vendors tends to be a little bit closer even when they go on sale.
And so all of the sets were 65 inches.
Yes.
But what about larger sizes?
So that was day 2. Thank
Okay.
you. Interesting. Excellent transition. Thank you. So day 2, they did a similar event. It was still part of the TV shootout. They only included 5 TVs. I think after the LG's performance in mini LED, they decided to take that out of the extra large competition. So what we saw on day 2 was 3 OLEDs and 2 mini LED TVs. The OLEDs were 77-inch for the Sony and the Samsung because that's the largest QD OLED panel you can get right now. And I think it was an 83 LG G4 OLED. And then there were 2 85-inch TVs. Oh, sure. You showing the results already. No mystery here. The 2 85-inch TVs were the mini LEDs. So same concept as the day before. The broadcast monitors were there as a reference, and we were supposed to take a look at the reference to use it as a reference, to see what things are supposed to look like. But instead of recording scores like 0 to 10 or 0 to 5 of all of the different picture elements, the judges were asked to pick their top 3 in order for each one of the different criteria that was being judged. So similar picture categories to day 1, a little bit different. They also did something very different, which was they didn't calibrate these TVs. They left them in like a filmmaker mode or cinema mode or professional mode. Whichever mode that they measured was as close to accurate as possible. That's what they set the TVs to. And they turned off all the eco savings, the economy, picture economy settings, because that can really mess with your picture. Or it can leave an ambient light sensor on that could adjust, the brightness of the picture depending on the room lighting. And that's actually not a bad feature to keep turned on a TV if you're, turning the lights on and off a lot,
Right.
because it can help compensate for ambient room. Better solution would be to, calibrate the TV for 2 different lighting conditions and then turn on the picture mode you want in each condition. But anyway, it was similar, except instead of test patterns, they really just used extended movie clips to test all of the different picture factors. So this was more of a, what is a consumer likely to get? Because
This
a lot of
sounds more like a
consumers,
real world test. This sounds like
yeah,
I take it home,
right,
I change to a couple presets, and
yeah.
this is what I'm going to get. And
Yeah, I
uh,
look online and see what's the best setting for my TV. Oh, it's
right,
filmmaker mode. Boom. Oh, I have to turn off eco savings. That's 2 settings, and that's it. A lot of owners are not going to go in and really get all
right,
DIY and calibrate the TV.
right,
So they are trying to make it more like a real world reflection of the performance that most buyers are going to get.
right. Didn't we hear a stat from Sony that only 80%, or sorry, 80% of people just use the setting out of the box or something like that? Or
It's a very high number. It's
it's
very,
like most people are
yeah,
just going to take the TV home, plug it in, and
yep,
watch however it
right.
is going to show up.
And it might be in
So
vivid mode. Yeah. So I'm sure I'm like you, that you go to a family or family member or friend's house, and you're like, give me that remote. And you go in and
Right.
make a few settings and like, isn't that better? And then sometimes they're like, no, it looks a little dark. You'll get used to it. So yeah, not everybody's a hobbyist. Sometimes people just go into a store and it looks good and it's a brand that they want and they buy it and they bring it home.
Right.
And if they'll set it to filmmaker mode and turn off the eco power savings thing, awesome.
Right.
And this was a closer reflection to, that kind of people.
All right. So now let's go over the winners of the
Mhm.
extra large TV shootout. These are the same models again, just the larger sizes.
Yep.
The Sony OLED A95L won again
Mhm.
for the out of the box large TV
Yep.
shootout. But this time, second place flipped. LG came in second with their
Mhm.
G4 OLED,
Yeah.
and Samsung third, the S95D. But we don't have actual scores to know how close
No
this
scores because
was.
there were no scores.
There
Were
were no
just,
scores. It
yeah,
was
they said pick your, 1, 2, and 3, and then they
right,
aggregated those scores among the 7 or 8 judges to come up with the highest
right,
number for each one. But yeah, it was based on preferences, and it was a lot more subjective than the previous day. And they didn't officially crown a king of XL TVs. They just said,
mm,
here's the one that the judges like the most, and here's the ones the judges like the second. So as the previous day, I should say, the OLEDs took the top 3. The mini LEDs were behind. It's
right.
just the way it was, and the content that they selected in various lighting conditions, the OLEDs did look a little better.
Right. And if we look at all the scores together, it's kind of a repeat of what you just said.
Yeah.
The OLEDs, I think in every category, were higher than any of the mini LEDs judged on the same benchmarks.
Yeah. And that's why I think I'll come back to this. I would probably, for me, buying it for like a vacation home or something, I might not buy any of the TVs on this list because you can get OLEDs for less than buying a flagship. LG, Samsung, Sony all make a more budget friendly version of an OLED. And in my opinion, the things that it does poorly are things that I can live with. The things that mini LED TVs do poorly are things that I can't live with. So I'd prefer to have a less expensive, maybe a Bravia 8 OLED or a LG like B4 or C4, knowing that my credits are going to look good. The white on the black is going to scroll
You and your
without.
credits, you gotta
I'm
have
a
those
I'm a
credits.
credit guy. I don't know why. I just love seeing black on white star fields. I'm a big sci-fi guy. A lot of the mini
Yeah,
LED TVs, when they see stars, some of them are going to bloom and some of them are going to disappear. And I
right,
can't handle that. It just bothers me too much. So it's all about personal preferences. And people who don't care about credits, they just skip to the next episode and binge
right,
watch. That's a valid choice. Take a look at the
right,
scores here on the scorecards, figure out which picture elements are most important to you, and buy
right,
accordingly. You might get the Samsung or the Sony mini LED because you got a bright room.
right,
Things like ultimate black quality don't bother you as much. You like having that brighter image that a mini
right,
LED TV can do, and more power to you. That's going to be a TV that you enjoy. You have to live with it, not me.
right,
So buy the one
right.
that you like based on these factors. I think the judges did a pretty good job, though, in identifying the strengths and the weaknesses of all. So,
Right. So so you kind of brought it back to real world buying
yeah.
versus the theoretical benchmark capability.
Hmm.
That's just a different way to evaluate a purchase decision.
Hmm.
And I do want to thank Robert Zone from Value Electronics. Like 20 years of doing this,
Yeah.
this is not an easy thing to do, to try to make
No.
this as fair as possible.
Yep.
Um, Setting up everything, but I'm sure everything doesn't work smoothly. Um,
Mm, yeah.
um, how do you? Yeah.
Glitches,
What
maybe,
are
or
the naysayers out there complaining about? Because no one's ever
oh,
happy.
some people were, complained about the Sony A95L being included because it's not a new TV. But again, my point on that is that it's still a current TV. Doesn't matter to me
Right.
what year it was built in. If it's Sony's best, then it's Sony's best. Um, there were some, kind of, I'd say, some glitches at the event that I wouldn't say undermined the results, but certainly made it drag on a lot longer than it should have. Um, One is the issue that the Samsung TVs don't support Dolby Vision. So when you're trying to send a uniform signal with dynamic HDR to all 6 TVs, sometimes the switch might get confused when it's got a Dolby signal coming in. It might identify the HDMI EDID, the handshake. It might say, sure, I can take Dolby Vision. But then when it
Right.
sends Dolby Vision to the Samsung doesn't like that. It's not geared to handle that. This isn't
Right.
something that would ever happen in the real world. If you have a Samsung TV hooked up to a streaming device or to a Blu-ray player, the EDID, the handshake on HDMI says, I can do HDR10 plus, I can't do Dolby Vision. And then the player is never going to try to send Dolby Vision to that TV. It's going to send HDR10 or HDR10 plus. So
Right.
the fact that we have 6 TVs that have different technical capabilities did make things a little bit of a challenge. I'd say we probably lost an hour over the course of the day, maybe 45 minutes, just trying to make sure that they weren't sending like a Dolby Vision signal to the Samsung
Right.
inadvertently, which would have made it look, worse than it should have, because it's not a signal that it can process properly.
Right.
In terms of the 2 dynamic HDR formats, I think Dolby Vision is a little more popular than HDR10 plus. So that's another factor that people might consider when buying a TV that wasn't really, talked about too much at the shootout. Because again, if you try to send a Dolby Vision signal to the Samsung, it wouldn't know what to do with it. And HDR10 plus to the LG, similar, right? It's only going to see the
Right.
static part of the content. And I don't know. Naysayers will be naysayers. Some people will come once and say, I'm never coming back again. Well, don't. I mean, Robert puts his heart and soul into this thing. He brings all the
Yeah.
TVs out of his personal stock.
That's a good point to make,
yes,
that these are not
yeah,
gifted models where the
no,
manufacturer got to tweak them.
oh yeah,
These are from stock. They're not.
correct. They're
There's
not
no
hero
games being
samples.
played.
They haven't,
Right.
they haven't been tweaked by a product manager before they were sent. They are calibrated, but they're calibrated out of the box. I mean, I assume if he had gotten one that was like just terrible, like broken out of the box, he wouldn't have used it, because that wouldn't be fair either.
Right.
But another thing that's kind of cool about what Robert does is that he offers the calibration service to his customers. Even if you're buying the TV from like California or Minnesota or, Ohio, he'll take your A95L or your Samsung, S95D. And I think it's normally Dwayne Davis, who's an amazing calibrator, who calibrates that TV before they ship it to you. They also break it in to make sure there's no dead pixels, that it's performing
Oh,
well,
wow.
meeting specifications. So it's not cheap. I think it's an extra $500 maybe on top of the TV price. But if you want to get a TV and you don't want to have to hire a local calibrator or try to mess around with it yourself, that's a pretty cool service that Value Electronics provides. They'll ship it to you pre-calibrated, and Bob's your uncle, as they say.
Yeah. Well, I've always wondered, why can't the manufacturer pre-calibrate it?
Yeah.
Why
Well,
does it have to be opened up? Is every
it-
model that different?
there are definitely sample to sample variations. And that's why when like David Katzmeyer publishes his results, for testing a TV on CNET, he doesn't say use these settings on your TV, but he'll say these are the settings I used on my TV when it was calibrated to give it the performance that I saw. But because of sample variations, you can't always rely on those being perfect. And that's why the calibration being done, on that specific model is very helpful. I think BenQ, the projector company, is providing calibration reports with their projectors when they send them out. So they are actually doing some basic calibration on their projectors before they send them out. I noticed that when they sent me a review sample. It was kind of a cool thing.
Right. I mean, you would think there's some kind of quality control when they make these things that they're testing, but why isn't there just an extra calibration control added to run through the battery of tests? And
well, no, because then you're talking about a manual process that would add labor to the cost of the TV. The TV is going to be more expensive for a feature that maybe, like you said, 80% of the people don't care about, because they might not even like a calibrated image. A calibrated image can be pretty dark because it's calibrated for cinema standards and cinema home standards. Might only be calibrated for like 100 nits in the SDR setting, which is going to be really dark.
So the calibrated setting correlates to the light level,
like a reference monitor.
Well, and to the light level, because you have dark room, right?
I think any good calibrator will calibrate the TV twice, once for light, once for dark. And there are settings like Dolby Vision has got a dark and a light mode. But yeah,
Yeah.
how do you know what the lighting is going to be exactly? So, right. So when Dwayne does this potentially at Value Electronics, the darkroom calibration is probably going to be pretty consistent because a dark room is a dark
Right.
room, right? It's got no lights. But the Lightroom calibration may be a little bit more of a judgment call. Like, just how bright do you want to calibrate it for? Like,
Right.
showroom bright or a couple of lamps in the corner bright. So,
Right. Right. So they've been doing this. They've been doing this TV shootout for 20 years.
mhm.
Is this helping the industry improve it?
If you ask Robert, he says so because everybody wants to be the king of TV, right? And
Yeah.
the results speak for themselves. Every year, the TVs get better, and the ones that don't
Mm,
get better don't show up.
right.
um, so this year, of course, I think it was the closest between an LCD TV and an OLED, but the gap is still there. I personally don't think in mini LED TV that specific technology is ever going to match OLED for black level reproduction, contrast, playing credits, for example.
You,
Um,
you and your credits.
I know no more credits. I won't talk about credits anymore. Um, I
Uh,
think it's going to take some new technology to beat OLED, either some new development within OLED, like the blue phosphors, being better and brighter and longer
right.
lasting, or potentially some developments in micro LED that haven't really made it into production yet. I mean, I've talked to some vendors that are working on some pretty cool mini LED technology micro LED technology that could
Mm,
make micro LEDs cost competitive with OLEDs.
right.
But without any of the drawbacks of an organic compound. So that's to be determined. Watch this
Right.
space. It'll probably be a couple of years before any radical new technology can really make it into production products. But
Right.
every year at CES, we see something new, some new advancement, whether it's Samsung's new screen, the diffusive screen, or
Right.
the Bravia 9's excessively high brightness.
Right.
I mean, to their credit, and I mentioned this to you when we went to the Sony event in March. When I looked out the window at dinner and saw a sunset,
Yeah.
I looked at it and thought, no, it was better on the Bravia 9. The mini LED TVs are amazing at that really high contrast, really bright
Right.
imagery production, and an OLED can't quite get there, but it gets close enough for me.
Right. Um, so I mean, TVs are already so good. Do they need to get better? What's going to get better?
Um, I guess at this point, if the price would come down on the really
Mm,
high performance OLEDs, that would be nice. Um, I mean, OLEDs still have some drawbacks compared to mini LEDs. The very high brightness is one of them. It's hard to really push the current OLED technology any brighter. LG's got the micro lens array, the MLA, that makes things brighter.
right.
Sony and Samsung use, I think, blue OLED elements with the quantum dot color layer to make things brighter because they can drive those a little harder. Um,
Right.
I don't know. Maybe it's good enough. Maybe we can just call it a day and say no more TV shootouts. But you know what? There's always going to be people who want to know what's the best one out there because that's the one they want to buy. So even if the improvements are just tweaks, people I think are still going to be intrigued by this kind of a roundup shootout event where everything is side
Right.
by side and on a level playing field.
Right. I mean, these are just picture quality.
Yeah,
There were no ratings for usability or audio
true.
or any other features that people might be interested in.
Yeah.
So I do want to point that out.
Mhm.
Any closing thoughts on just the shootout, where TVs are going, or what you'd like to see?
Um, I guess it might be nice if they do a shootout next year, which they probably will. If they could make the event a little bit shorter. I mean, it felt like first day was probably 6 hours, and that's a long time to be sitting in a room, watching TVs. But some of the things they just didn't see during the rehearsals, like the Dolby Vision issue, which really extended, the test time.
Right.
So I think they're doing the best with what they've got. Again, Robert's out of pocket in these things. He's hiring the calibrators to calibrate the TVs. He's providing the stock for the TVs. So I don't know how they could make it better. I mean, it was convenient when it was in Manhattan. A lot more people could get there,
Mm,
because the Scarsdale shop is maybe about 45 miles or so north of Manhattan. So you either have to
right,
take a train up there or drive up there. Convenient enough for me because I'm in Queens most of the time.
right,
Um, yeah, location is a little bit of a stretch, but it's not too bad. I mean, it's not that close
right,
to an airport, but it's close enough to get there in like
right,
an hour with an Uber or a train from the city.
right. Well, having not been there, just my perspective of looking at the results and thinking about what consumers might want, um, why not add like a budget category to this shootout? Like, what's the best TV under $1,000 or under $500 to help people in their TV purchasing? Um, or perhaps the margins are so thin at that point that they don't they don't want to do it. But my guess is there'd be greater gaps in performance between 500 and 1,000 than there are between the three top models.
Yeah, well, let's look at, where Value Electronics fits into the big picture here. They don't sell $500 TVs and they
Mm,
never will. They're
okay.
a high-end custom integrator and custom installer in Scarsdale and Westchester. So most of their clientele, has a fair amount of money to spend, and I mean, I'm not saying they're not going to go out to, Costco or Walmart and buy a $500 TV for a spare room,
Right.
but I don't think Robert's interested in catering to that market.
Mm,
Excuse me. So he doesn't have a lot of vested interest in doing a budget TV category. If it's like the under 1,000 or something, then you could take potentially entry level models. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing that, like a B4, and Sony's least expensive OLED, Samsung's
mhm,
least expensive OLED, and
right.
and some of these up and comers like TCL and Hisense with their mini LED TVs, which are way below the price of anything in this competition. I mean, their 65-inch models are between 1,000 and 1,500 bucks for their top of the line mini LED
Right.
QLED models, right? So it would be very cool to see that, like what some of the entry level models compared to the high end TCL and Hisense, to see which one of those compare. But that would take a lot more. It would be exactly one of these, but then done for a separate set of TVs. So it would add a lot of expense, I think, and time onto the event. Um,
Right.
maybe
Um,
maybe someone other than Value Electronics should do a comparison like that. Um, but
right.
I'm not sure who would do it. Maybe Consumer Reports, maybe
Right.
some other vendor, or maybe just some of the enthusiast sites, to compare these
Right.
kinds of things together. Um,
Right. But I mean,
that's
it's a
an idea.
large undertaking to get the judges, get everything set up. This is not just
Absolutely.
something that you throw together over one weekend because you have some boxes to like.
Right. Yeah. I wouldn't recommend it. Having been involved only like kind of tangentially in these and the projector shootouts, I see how much work is involved in putting one of these together. And more power to the people who do it, because yeah, and like I said,
Right.
it takes a lot of effort, and I really appreciate it because I don't have the facilities in my basement home theater to be able to look at even three TVs at a time, let alone six. So
Right.
being able to see them professionally calibrated with awesome content head to head is a very cool opportunity, and I like, hopefully they'll do it again next year so we can
Right.
do it all over again.
That's right. These are the best TVs of 2024. We probably won't get new models, although Panasonic is coming out with models this September.
Mhm.
So that'll shake up the landscape that they were not part of the competition. After that, we don't expect new models from Sony, Samsung, or LG until the spring of 2025 at the
Mhm.
earliest.
Right.
So these are your best of the best right now. Three top models from the best brands, and Sony certainly came out the winner. But I
Mhm.
certainly want to direct people to look at all the different models.
Mhm.
And any closing thoughts, Chris, before we wrap this up?
No, I think we covered it. I think it's yeah, like I said, it's not a perfect event, but it's perfectly fine. I mean, it's a unique opportunity that you don't get uh really anywhere else. To see all these TVs head to head in one location, professionally calibrated, not too many distractions, controlled lighting. So I appreciate it. I'm glad we keep getting invited. I continue to keep going, cover it for another 13 years if I live that long and the TV event lives that long. But it was fun once again. And yeah, thanks to Robert and all the organizers and putting the whole thing together.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to thank Robert and Value Electronics for the shootout and his contribution to the industry. And yeah, we want to thank everyone for tuning in this time on the Acoustics podcast. And we hope to see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you to our sponsor, Q Acoustics. From the affordable but high-performance 3000i series to the new advanced 5000 range through to the high-end Concept family. Make Q Acoustics your entry point, your next sonic step up, or your end-all for your hi-fi and music listening journey.